Okay. So this is what I see in law firms, particularly when it comes to fee earners and their performance. But first and foremost, most fee earners in firms don't know what their budget is. Now, you might sit there and think to yourself, well, oh, yes, they do. We tell them. But it's very interesting when I run sessions with teams and talk to individual fee earners, and I say, what is your budget? How does it work? What is it that you need to be achieving? And they often don't know. They often aren't clear on what their budget is, let alone what their day-to-day KPIs are that they're required. Some of them have got a vague idea around billable hours and so on, but generally they don't have clarity on what their budget is. Secondly, there's no correlation between people's budgets or fee earners' budgets and the activities that they actually do. There's no buy-in around their budgets because they view them either as not being achievable because of the other activities that they've got to undertake, or their view on what is billable and what isn't billable, as an example, isn't aligned. And the biggest ticket item, not them just not understanding what their budget is, but they also generally have no idea about how they're tracking. Most people, from my experience, want to hit their baseline expectations, but unless they know exactly where they are heading and what's expected of them, and then they can measure their performance around how they're going, most people find it very difficult to achieve their outcomes. And my experience with firms is that they leave it up to their fee earners to manage that information themselves. Keep track of where you're up to yourself. They only sort of hear about it if ever they get managed around not performing. But most people, don't actually know where to look. Most people don't know what they need to achieve. Then they just don't know how they're going. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about today the key mechanisms that you need to have within your firm. For one, engaging your team around what's expected of them. Two, making sure that the activities that they undertake align to their ability to achieve their budget. And also making sure that they're informed on how they're tracking. In looking at this for hundreds of firms, as soon as there's visibility around these things, firms get a shift in the amount of profitability and revenue and cash flow simply by getting good, strong, tight systems in there around managing expectations, educating about expectations, and then keeping people informed. So that's the first thing that you need to do when you're looking at setting your budgets for your fee earners next year, and that's to manage expectations. So the first thing you've got to assess is, what are your baseline expectations for your fee earners? What are those things that you're expecting them to achieve that you pay them to do? Now, this is an absolutely critical point, that unless you've got clarity around what those baseline expectations are, you can't educate and engage your team around what they are. Now, I often hear people say, we've got 4.5, 5 hours of billable expectation a day, 5.5, 6 hours, whatever that might be. But you need to make sure that if your expectations are just set around billable hours, that you make sure that the client, the fee earner is engaged around that as well. And that's just what your baseline is. And if you think about baseline expectations and you think about baseline performance, what you want to be able to do is make sure you build a business model that is aligned around a starting point of just achieving your baseline. Because if you can achieve your baseline, then most likely you're going to achieve your outcomes. So let's say that baseline is 5 hours of billable per day that people end up billing to clients. So if you think about how how your level of frustration. So you think about your level of frustration in the business. I often get feedback from the principals of firms saying, it's like bashing our heads up against a brick wall, trying to get our people to hit their baseline billable hours per day. So just imagine what it'd feel like, that level of frustration, if people did actually achieve their baseline every day. And that happens almost always. So your frustration level is not going to be there. So it makes sense to me to really focus on what are the things you need to be doing in your business for that baseline to be achieved. If you fall short of that baseline, say that sometimes the baseline is met, your frustration level is quite high. So you don't want that to happen. But then you'll have this minority of people that exceed the baseline, and that's a bit of a bonus. But you don't have any frustration around that. You actually, your expectations have been exceeded, so you actually feel pretty good. So the key to, first of all, managing your financial output in your business is to make sure you've got absolute clarity and engagement around that baseline, being the baseline that people are paid to do. So something you might want to have a look at if you've got some time is there's a company called Gallup, and Gallup have done some research, and they have a questionnaire around employee engagement, and they have 12 questions that they have employees answer to determine how engaged that team is. And this has been running for decades on the same 12 questions through companies throughout the world. But the number one question is, I know what's expected of me. So the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to make sure that your employees know what's expected of them, because if they know what's expected, then they've got a chance of achieving that. So if you want to have a look at that and dig into it a little bit deeper, go to q12.gallup.com. I run these polls in our business to get an insight into areas that we need to be focusing on. And for me, that is always the starting point, making sure that people are engaged. So let's look at now how we can achieve some results. So if you think about how these results are achieved and you want to get a different outcome, you've got to focus on what is driving that outcome. And what drives an outcome in a business is the behavior. So what is the behavior that's producing an outcome? So if, for example, the baseline achievement is billing 5 billable hours per day, what are the behaviors in the business that are producing a less than par or less than 5 hours a day? And that might be just purely around people just not understanding what they should be putting into WIP. It might be that people are pretty lax at preparing their timesheets every day. So what drives the behavior is the structure. So if you think about, we want to get a different outcome, you've got to think about what the structure is that drives the behavior that produces that outcome. So if we go back to step one is engage with your team members, make sure that they understand what's expected of them. Then we have a whole process that's built around how they record their time, how billing occurs within the business, so that it manages the right behaviours in the business to produce the outcome. So we've got to constantly focus on that. But where most people go wrong is they just focus on this outcome and they don't really think about what are the things that we're doing in the business that are driving the behaviours that we don't want. And that's the structure. So if our behaviour the outcome we want is for people to hit their budgets, what we've got to think about is what are those behaviours that we need people to do to make sure they hit their budgets. And the first one is follow the system. So if we want people just to follow our standard systems that we have in the business, because that's going to produce the outcome we want, we need to then have a really good look at what those systems are. So at the end of the day, engaging with your team around their baseline expectations is one thing, but then it's what are the systems and processes that you have in your business that are then going to change that behavior so that the outcome that we get is hitting their budgets. So the first thing that you need to do when it comes to managing people to hit their budgets is blame the system, not the people. We just go back here to this. The outcome that you're achieving in your business is a direct result of the systems and the structures that you have, because it's those systems and structures that you have in your business that drive the behavior. So it's not the people's fault. All that people can do is react to the structure, can react to the system that drives their behavior to produce the outcome. So what we've got to do is, first of all, change your mindset. Blame the system, not the people. What are the systemic changes that we've got to make in the business, to our structure, to our system, so that we are going to get a different outcome? Because what you've got to remember is that most people need structure. This is why in societies we have towns and governments and community groups and teams, and most people need structure. They've got to work within a structure. Most people can't work without a structure. And the other thing is, most people want to achieve. Most people want to actually do what's expected of them. So just first and foremost, just change your thinking. Stop blaming the people, stop bashing your head up against a brick wall and say, right, what have we got to change in terms of our system so that we can hit our budgets? So how do we set those budgets, and what are the systems that we need to have in place to make sure that those budgets are achievable? So whenever if you've listened to one of my webinars before, you'll know that I have three rules for strategic change, and these are basic principles from some common sense sayings and ideas and research that people have done over the years. The first one is a thing called the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept what I can't control, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The second one is Einstein's definition of insanity, and that is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And lastly, it's the 80-20 rule, focusing on the majority as opposed to the minority. So first of all, with the serenity prayer, only focus on the things you can control. So when it comes to setting budgets, you can control that. You can absolutely control what the budgets are that you set for people. There are things that you can't control around what they do. You can actually control the systems and processes around time recording and billing. You can't control what people do day in, day out in terms of how much work they're actually doing. Einstein's definition of insanity. So if you want to do something different, if you want to get different results, you've got to do something different. So again, if you're focusing on the things that you can control, you create a system that's going to produce a different result for you, then you're going to get a different result. So you need to be focusing on doing something different because currently it's not working, and then still only focus on what you can control. But focus on the majority and not the minority. Now, my experience is that the majority of people want to achieve their budgets, want to achieve their outcomes, but it's the systems and processes that are in the business that are letting them down. So what we've got to do is we've got to build systems and processes, the things that we can control, doing something different so that the majority of people are able to achieve what's expected of them. So we've got to remember those, focus on those things. So again, what is it that we can control? We can control the system, aka the structure, but what we can't control is employee attitude. All an employee can do, your fee earners, all they can do is they can choose to align to a system or not. If they're not aligning to the system, then you've got another issue. But so long as they understand the system and the system is designed to help them do what they need to be doing to achieve what's expected of them, then you've got a chance for success. Okay, so we need to apply the rules. What is it that you can do differently? So first of all, actively engage with your team on their expectations. Very important. What is expected of you? What's expected of you is to do your client work. You're expected to achieve X billable hours or chargeable hours per day. You need to put that into your timesheet. But what's also expected is that you follow our systems and processes. And those systems and processes are designed to produce predictable outcomes. So from a financial management point of view, if you want to go back and dig a bit deeper into how you drive improvements in profitability, some of my previous webinars on our two numbers, and one of them being average rate, really focus on what are those things you need to be doing in the business to drive improvements in profitability. And one is making sure you're getting better time entry recording. One of the strategies around doing that is to make sure people understand what should be going into WIP and what shouldn't be going into WIP. Most write-offs or most bad debts happen at the point in time of timesheet entry because there's not clarity within the business around what should be put into WIP and what shouldn't be. You know, what goes on a timesheet. Basically, there's three things that you don't put on a timesheet. One is doing a cost agreement. Two is raising a fee. Three is managing any fee inquiries. Everything else goes on a timesheet because it's work that's being done on that matter. Whether it's billed is another question. Billing is a separate function to timesheet entry. But because what happens within businesses, there's a big focus on the systems of you've got to put this, you've got to hit billable hours. This is about what you've got to bill, what you're going to bill. It drives people to make the decision right at the front end that they don't want to bill a client for that because they're going to be scrutinised. Here's another little system that you can apply. Stop doing itemised bills for clients. When you do an itemised bill, it works against you because it means that people, when they're doing their timesheets, are concerned about the client seeing something and questioning whether or not they actually should have done that work or not. Whereas if they don't do an itemised bill, clients don't get to see that. They can always request an itemised bill and you can always provide it to them. But what you're remembering, what you're wanting to do is if you've got a system around providing clients with itemised bills, then the behaviour that it supports is don't put all that time on your timesheet because it's going to ultimately be put on a bill for a client, which is the opposite to what you want people to be doing. You're wanting them to be entering time on a timesheet. And that's the first step in managing your average rate. Your average rate is just the relationship between the revenue that is actually billed by a particular fee earner divided by the number of hours that they're paid for. They're paid in a year, which in a 38-hour week is 1,976 hours in a year. So if you want to improve that average rate, people have got to be billing more. And the drivers of that is getting your timesheet entries in there and then managing your billing, client engagement, and then billing process to maximize the revenue that is being billed. So what you can do differently is actively engage your team on expectations. And those expectations are twofold. This is your budget, but also here's your systems and processes that you need to follow. What's expected about putting entry into WIP? What's your processes around billing? What's processes around re-engagement of clients? So what you then need to be focusing on is having the majority of fee earners and manage. So you've got to be focusing on the majority of fee earners and managing their expectations. Don't focus on the minority. Build your systems so that they drive those core processes so that they drive results. And they are fundamentally these. One, set your fee earners' budgets based on what's expected around their billing and their chargeable hours that are going into WIP. Make sure those numbers align. I'll come back to that in a minute. Secondly, is what you then need to be doing is you then need to be engaging with them around it and then reporting back on how they're going. But your business systems need to support that around client engagement, client re-engagement, and also around billing. But here's a warning. Don't set any expectations of others higher than what you'd set for yourself. So as a principal of a business or as a leader of a team, if you've got expectations that are set for your team that you wouldn't be able to achieve yourself, you're asking for trouble because they'll see through all of that. They'll say, well, you can't achieve that or you don't achieve that. Why should we? So make sure your expectations are realistic. But remember, the thing that produces better outcomes around fee earner budgets is making sure your systems and structures align to the behaviors that you want. So hitting a budget of 5.5 hours of billable time or time entered into WIP and actually build has got two components to it. First of all, make sure the time gets in. Second of all, make sure that the system builds it. So most people don't really buy into a system because they have no control over what it is that's expected of them. So take, for example, you've got an explanation to a fee earner that says you've got to hit 5 billable hours billed to clients per day, but they have no ability to sign off on what gets billed to a client or not. That happens at a partner level, say. So the only thing that they can control is their time entry, but what they're getting measured on is something that they have no control over, which is the actual billing, which is the expectation that's been set. So again, if they're not being able to get that connection between what I can control and what I'm expected, then you're going to find it very difficult to get buy-in. So from a billing point of view, you need to make sure that your billing systems actually support the outcomes that you're wanting around billable hours that actually get billed to clients. And what that means is this: if the time's in WIP, bill it, but also have systems and processes in your business that re-engage clients along the way when their matter is either going out of scope or approaching the previous estimates that have been provided in your cost agreements. The more you do that and the more you focus on that, and you take billing out of the hands of fee earners and turn it into an administration function that bills for the work that's actually done, then you can start really achieving some changes in your outcomes. So what's the system? So with your system, when you look at setting those budgets, start with the numbers. Start with a global approach as opposed to going straight into the nitty-gritty of the details around people's numbers, individual numbers. Start with a global approach and build from the ground up. Start with what your direct labor cost is. What is the cost of all of our solicitors, our legal support people? Don't worry about receptionists and IT people and practice managers. Start first and foremost with that direct labor cost, and then think about how much profit do we need to make, gross profit, that is revenue minus our direct labor cost. How much of that do we need to make to cover our overheads and produce our profits? So start with that global position so that you know as a business, this is what our total profit outcome is that we need to achieve. Then break that down into your departments. And when I talk about departments are basically where you've got groups of people that are managed by somebody. So it doesn't necessarily mean a family law department or a commercial law department or a PI department. If groups of people only work solely within that department, then that makes sense. But when you're talking about a department, it's how a group of people are managed around producing the right outcomes from the numbers. What's their level of revenue that they generate compared to the amount of labour cost? So if you have departments and you're able to do that, break it down and then go into the individuals and look at what those numbers need to be able to produce that departmental and global output. So you start at the high end and then work from the ground up to get your answers. And test it. Test the numbers with reality. What are the expectations that you have? So we expect it to be 5 hours a day, or 5.5 hours a day, and how does that compare against our capacity? Capacity being the maximum amount of revenue that you can generate if people are hitting their baseline expectations. So let's say that you needed to hit $2 million worth of professional fees billed in a year to achieve a $500,000 profit, just say. And then when you go and you look at what your capacity is, and your capacity is based on people doing 5 hours a day at X dollars per hour, if that capacity comes up to $1.7 million, then you've got to stop and say, well, hang on, is that real? What do we need to change there? What are the differences? Do we have enough people? Do we have our charge rates too low? Is our 4 hours or 5 hours a day too low? So get that system and structure aligned. I often don't see that. Usually what I do is I go into firms and I see a $2 million target for revenue, but their capacity is actually something like $3 or $3.5 million. They have more than enough capacity within their resources that they employ, but their systems let them down by not hitting the fundamental, not achieving the outcomes from those fundamental drivers of revenue production. So start with that, and then fix your revenue processes. Make it easier for people to achieve their baseline expectations. At the end of the day, there's no right or wrong way of setting an expectation for a fee earner around their budgets. The only, in terms of what numbers, right? Is it 4.5 hours? Is it 5 hours? Is it 5.5 hours? Personally, I think from a time entry point of view, all fee earners should be able to achieve at least 6 hours plus a day because they're busy doing work on client matters. It's just that they're choosing not to enter it. Doesn't mean it all should actually be billed, but what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you've got a baseline that is achievable based on the structure that you've got. So the easier it is with your systems and processes, the easier it is to hit your baseline expectations, the more engaged people are going to be. If you say to them it's 6 hours or it's 6.5 hours because you're busy, unless you go and really change the driving activities, like around, making it easy for people to, enter their time because they've got clarity around what's included and what isn't, changing up your billing processes, changing up your client engagement processes. Unless you go and fix those processes, you're not going to get buy-in. So you've really got to focus in on driving those key processes. So the best place to start is to educate your team. And you've got to start educating them globally on the financial model and what it is that's expected of them, and why them doing their bit is critical. And if you think of it like this, you have one solicitor, and that one solicitor might be expected to bill 5 hours a day, but they only do 4 hours a day. And just keeping it nice and simple, let's say that they work for 8 hours a day. So that's only half of their time that they actually enter into WIP. Let's say they write off 10% of that. So there's only 3.6 hours a day that they're actually going and billing. But what you're paying them for is you're paying them for those 8 hours. You're actually paying them more than that, because you're going to pay them also for about 8 weeks of the year that they're not there on holidays and public holidays and sick leave. So your team needs to really understand the fundamental drivers of how your financial model works, that it's not just about them in isolation hitting their expectations. it's also about every person in the business achieving their expectations so that you've got sufficient profitability to cover your overheads and to make profits to pay your bills and so on. So start with that education. You need to make sure that everyone understands how the financial mechanics of your business works. You can't assume that that's the case because they generally don't know. The number of times I go into firms and I say to them in a little session, say, what do you make per hour for the firm? And someone will say, oh, $400 an hour, because they think that what they're making is their charge rate. When usually when you break it all down, most firms that are going and that have got issues around or challenged around profitability generally have an average rate that they make per hour of labour cost of less than $100 or thereabouts. And that's why they're really struggling to drive good profitability. So you've got to educate your team. As I said before, most people want to achieve, they just need to know. So when you're setting your budgets, make sure that they understand why it's achievable. They need to, they need to understand that everything that they do on a client matter goes into WIP. And then you need to make sure that if they are expected to bill what goes into WIP, make sure your systems hold them accountable for that billing. Make sure your systems hold them accountable for engaging with clients when those fee estimates are going to be have to be increased. Soon they'll align. So educate them globally, but engage them individually. So you need to actually sit down with every single person in your business and have one-on-one discussions with them around their baseline expectations. Don't just assume everybody understands. Make sure that you're then taking them through what they do and how those expectations are developed. At the end of the day, the expectation that you must have for people is around revenue build. At the end of the day, that is what they need to be focused on, because that is what gets billed, that's what gets turned into cash, that's what pays their salary. Focusing purely on time entry is not going to get you over the line. You need to have a connection in your business between what time gets entered and then what the engagement and billing process is, so that they've got absolute clarity between what's going into WIP and what's getting billed out of WIP. So you need to engage with them one-on-one, because everyone is going to have a different view. And you need to work away one-on-one, setting those baseline expectations so that you've got a level playing field. As to then how they're managed in terms of their performance, that also gets looked at on an individual basis, but it's managed on an exceptions basis only. So when you're measuring, you need to make sure that people have got individual weekly, monthly progress updates. Again, if we go right back to the start, set your budgets. Your budgets have got to be a function of how much revenue they've got to bill based on the labour costs that you employ, as a sum across the entire business so that the business achieves its financial outcomes. So you set those budgets, but people need to be able to see how they're progressing. Don't just rely on them to go and hop into the practice management system to see where they're going. All of the practice management systems have got a function in there where they can track their time added or their timesheet entries, what the dollar value is or how many hours. But you can't leave that up to chance. So you can't control whether or not they go in and do that. What you need to do is you need to physically provide people with reporting that shows them how they're going. Now, if you can produce that reporting simply out of your practice management system, great. If not, you need to create something that helps you with that. And as I said, as a minimum, you've got to do monthly. Weekly is even better so people can get their progress. But as a minimum, make sure they're tracking how they're going monthly. Now, the other thing that you've got to be very mindful of when you're measuring progress, and you've got to be making sure that the data that they are receiving is appropriate, that is correct. They've got to buy into it. I learned long ago, one of the biggest challenges with managing change within a law firm is around engaging the fee earners, um, to do what they need to be doing what they need to be doing. And I stopped and thought, so your training is all based on evidence. And what happens with most of the reporting that comes out of practice management systems that relates to the individual performance of a fee earner isn't really good evidence. It doesn't actually align to reality. So, often that information is dismissed by fee earners because they just don't believe it's true. Now, let me give you an example of that. So let's say you've set somebody a target that they've got to bill $40,000 a month, and how you've arrived at that is you've looked at what their salary is, you've looked at what their number of billable hours are per day that they're expected to bill out. You've arrived at a figure of $480,000, and you've divided it by 12. Now, when that number then, $40,000 a month, gets put into the practice management system. So when there's some reporting that's heading back to the fee earner, they've got $40,000 for the month, but they see they've only billed out $15,000, and they go, that's just rubbish. There's no way I was going to be able to get to $40,000. Now, the reason is in that month is because they're away for 3 weeks. So if they're away for 3 weeks, the system's still saying spit out 40 grand, but I'm only there for 1 out of the 4 weeks, so shouldn't it really only be $10,000? So one of the biggest challenges with engaging your team around managing their own expectations around hitting their budgets is making sure that the data that you're providing to them aligns to the reality. So if your expectation is based on them billing out X number of hours every month, then what that budget needs to be set on is the hours that they're actually there at work. So if they're expected to be doing 5 hours a day out of a 7.6-hour day, I think that's about 72% of their time. So their budget should be at how many hours were you there for that month, not on holidays, not sick, times their productivity percentage, 72%, multiplied by their charge rate, $450 an hour. That's what their budget is for the month. Now, that can go up and down every month depending on the number of days that are in the month. But what we tend to do is just take out averages. And if we just take averages, like doing $40,000 a month, then the fee earners, one, as I said, they don't believe the numbers because it doesn't align to reality. But two, their behaviours are likely to be, well, I don't really care about it. I'm not going to focus on monitoring that because my performance is not being measured against something that's real. So be very aware of that when you're measuring progress. But what I find is as soon as people start getting clear on what their expectations are, and then they get the information that shows them how they're performing, the majority of people self account. They hold themselves accountable for delivering on what's expected of them. So again, when it comes down to managing their exceptions, do that one-on-one. So if people are just achieving their outcomes, let it keep going. But if they're within relevant tolerances, that's okay. But when you've got exceptions and people aren't, manage them one-on-one, drill in with them as to what's not happening. How is the system breaking down? Remember, blame the system, not the people. How is the system? What is it that you're doing within your system that is making sure that that's creating behaviours that aren't allowing your outcomes to be achieved? Often that's as simple as, hey, you're not doing your timesheets every day. If you do your timesheet every day, you hold yourself accountable to hitting that number every day, build that discipline into your daily routine. Often that then creates the change that's required in behaviour to produce a better outcome. Okay, so let me show you what that might look like in terms of some numbers. This is an application that I've built that I use with my clients called My Numbers, and this application then allows us to connect payroll data from zero with practice management data. So currently, the data that we pull into our back-end database, it comes from live data connections with ActionStep. We are currently in the process of connecting a client's smokeball data to their smokeball application via Smokeball's API. We have specific data that we extract out of Affinity, LexisNexis Affinity, that gets uploaded into our backend that produces this information. And also we extract some specific data out of Leap when those people use another application called RedView. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to really drill in on how the performance is going for a firm, and this is the sort of data that you've got to be able to produce for your team so that they can see exactly how they're going. Now, I'm not going to drill into this data because as soon as I do, I'll start exposing client information. So I can see up here at company name, I've got some multiple selections here. So I've just got a number of clients that I've ticked here so that their names aren't exposed. But what we're able to then do is you're able to work through that and look at how this performance works sort of per department. So there's an example of a commercial department, and or you can go and have a look at a specific employee type. Let's say for our professional fee earners, how's their performance? And I won't click on this one, but it also drops down for every employee name for every employee that's in there. So this data is either live coming in every overnight. It pulls in the data from zero so that from the payroll data, it only is picking up the hours that people are there at work, and then matches the timesheet entry data to it so that, and then recalculates the budgets every pay cycle so that we know exactly what those budgets should be. And so if you think about this on an individual point of view, so if I was to select an particular employee here, be able to see the performance of that employee over a period, a range that we can select here. I've just done the first 10 months of this financial year. So based on their number of available hours that they're here at work, what is the amount of time entered for that period, and what was their budget time entered? So what was it based on their expected productivity, based on the number of hours that they're at work multiplied by their charge rate? What's that budget of $4.53 million that should have been? That's an accumulation of a number of people, but on an individual basis, what should have you had? And then for that person, what have you actually billed compared to your budget? Now, this data is extracting some data where you've got your budgets that have been, these clients had set budgets that are less than their expected billable hours per day. And that's reflected over here in their billing, so that people can actually get some comparison of the reality of how they're going actual versus budget. Comparing those numbers here, this is what's expected to go into WIP. This is what I'm actually putting into WIP. This is what I'm actually billing. So in here, the more of this information you can provide to people, the better it is that they're able to then manage their own expectations around accountability, focusing on their productivity and their own average rates. So what's the percentage of time I'm at work? So that's just an example that I want to show you of how you need to be building information that you're presenting back to your team so that you're managing their expectations. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. What's the expectation of number of billable or of hours into time? Is it 4.5? Is it 5? Is it 5.5? Is it 6? It doesn't matter. Whatever the relevant number is for your business has got to be aligned to your systems and processes that will produce ultimately your global financial results that you need. So you've got to go back to the baseline, and you've got to be able to measure that. Okay, so fix your revenue process. First thing you've got to do is remove timesheet discretion. Entering time is a must. At the end of the day, whether if you're using fixed fees for clients, at the end of the day, it's the amount of revenue you generate from the hours that you pay. So you need to know how much time is being spent on every matter. And you need to remove that timesheet discretion. And you need to get the habit, the behavior in the business so that timesheets are entered every day. You also need to remove non-billable rates. So you want to stop your fee earners making a decision at the point in time of when they do their timesheets, whether or not something is going to be billed. If it's not cost agreement, if it's not raising a fee, if it's not answering a fee inquiry, it should be going on a timesheet. But they shouldn't be selecting whether or not it's at a zero rate or if it's non-billable to a client. Everything needs to go in so that when you get to the end of that matter, or when your billing process occurs during that matter, there can be an assessment of how the actual time that's being spent on it, how it's going against your estimate and your budget. Implement fixed fee variation. So if you're a fixed fee business, a fixed fee, a variation for anything that's outside of your standard fixed fee quote must be included. If you can do that, then what that's going to do is it's going to drive up the ability for people to recover more of their revenue out of the work that they're actually doing. So again, it comes down to how you engage with your clients and what your billing systems and processes are. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to focus on the dollars that are going into WIP first. So timesheet entry is the key. So again, the key to that is engage your team around what WIP entry is really all about. It's not about making a decision what we're going to bill to a client. It's about understanding how much time has been spent on that matter. And it's not their choice to say, I'm putting it into a timesheet or not. So you've got to then build your systems around how you focus on what the value is of that time going into WIP first of all. Most people just focus on what gets billed or what gets recovered in cash. Your focus must be on time entry. And the more visibility you can create around that, the better. Engage your team at the front end. Okay, so just to wrap up, setting your fee earner budgets for next year. The first thing that you need to do is work on what your model is. So what is it that we need to achieve from a profitability point of view? What's our labour cost? What are our overheads? What is our revenue that we need to achieve to get that profit? Step back then and say, let's have a look at what capacity we've got. How much out of all of our people, what are our baseline expectations around billable hours and what they should be billing and what their charge rates are and their time entry? How does the capacity, if they hit that, what does that number come to compared to what we actually need to achieve in terms of our budgets? What you then need to do is then drill down and have a look at what that difference is and say, right, well, if we're short, we need to change it up. But most of the time, your capacity will be more than what you want to bill. You then got to go back and revisit your systems and processes and look at what the structure is that's driving the behaviours that aren't allowing you to produce that capacity. And there's a whole range of things. How you engage with your clients, how you price your estimates, what your billing processes are, what your timesheet entry processes and monitoring is, how you re-engage your clients, a whole bunch of those things. But then once you've agreed on what those budgets need to be on that fee earner level, you need to engage with your team around making sure they understand their individual components comprise a much bigger picture and how revenue is calculated. Then you need to engage with them individually around their personal expectations. You need to achieve this, and this, because this is the baseline for what's expected for what you're getting paid to do. Then once you've done that, start providing them with information around how they're performing in terms of their time entry and compared to their billing. So that, ultimately what you want to do is you want them hitting their time entry budgets, and you're also wanting them to hit their billing budgets and give them back their control over via visibility around their own personal accountability to achieve that. And then manage the exceptions. So provide them with information. Check in with people who aren't hitting their numbers, but blame the systems, not the people. Focus on what it is that they're doing that isn't complying with the system, or how the system might be working against them to achieve their outcomes. And an example of that is, you want me to hit X dollars worth of billing, but I have no control over what gets billed, and a lot of time is being written off. So, so setting your budgets for next year, what you need to do is fundamentally build it from the ground up, engage your people, and then monitor their progress, and do that in a disciplined and diligent way. As always, with my webinars, I always offer for anyone who's participated in the webinar today to email me for a free 45-minute online meeting to discuss fee earner budgets or any other issues that are concerning them around their profitability and cash flow in their business. So all you've got to do is email me at matt@fwoca.com.au today, and we'll schedule in a time to catch up and explore what you can be doing within your business to drive improvements in profitability and cash flow. So thank you very much for your attendance today. My name's Matt Schlyder from FWA Chartered Accountants. We're the lawyers accountants. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.